I'd always been proud of the life we built. Our home, our routines, the laughter that used to echo through the walls. Emily was the kind of person who could make anyone feel like the center of the universe. She had a talent for it, a dangerous one, though I didn't know how dangerous until the night everything began to unravel. It started with a noise. I was up late in my study, going over some paperwork for a client, when I heard the unmistakable sound of her laughter. But it wasn't coming from our bedroom. It wasn't even in the house. It was outside, soft but unmistakable, floating through the open window. Curiosity isn't the same as suspicion. Not at first. I assumed she was on the phone, maybe catching up with her sister or one of her friends. But when I looked out the window, I saw her silhouette at the edge of our backyard. She wasn't alone. The man standing with her was partially hidden by the shadow of the oak tree, but he was tall, broad-shouldered, and too close to her. Closer than any friend should be. Her hand rested on his arm, and even in the faint light of the moon, I could see the familiarity in her posture. The tilt of her head, the way she leaned into him like they were sharing a secret. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just stood there, watching as Emily leaned up and kissed him. Not a peck, not a brief moment of hesitation, but a slow, deliberate kiss that shattered every lie I had been telling myself about us. The moment stretched on, an eternity compressed into a heartbeat. Then she laughed again, soft and sweet, and walked back toward the house, leaving him behind in the shadows. He stayed there for a moment, like he owned the night, before disappearing into the darkness. My mind raced. My body felt paralyzed. When she stepped back inside, she looked calm, almost serene, like she hadn't just set fire to the world I thought I knew. "Hey," she said casually when she saw me standing in the doorway of my study. "You're still up?" Her voice was steady, not a trace of guilt or nervousness. I didn't confront her right away. Couldn't. My head was spinning, and I needed time to think. I told myself I was imagining things, that maybe it was some misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew better. The pieces didn't fit. They hadn't fit for weeks, no months, and I had been too blind, too trusting to see it. That night, as she slept beside me, I stayed awake, my mind replaying every moment of that kiss. I thought about the way her laugh had sounded so different, freer, like she wasn't pretending with him the way she had been with me. By morning, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to ask her who he was. Not yet. If there was one thing I had learned in life, it was that people reveal more when they think you don't know. I needed proof, real proof, before I made my move. And so I began to watch. Quietly. Closely. Emily had no idea that the man she had kissed in the moonlight had woken something in me. A version of myself I didn't even know existed. This wasn't going to end the way she thought. The morning after I saw them, Emily greeted me like nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, asked if I wanted coffee, and rattled on about how busy her day was going to be. It was so casual, so normal, that for a moment I doubted what I'd seen. But the memory of her standing in the backyard with him came flooding back, sharp and vivid. She thought I didn't know. That was her first mistake. I decided to play along, to act like the oblivious husband while quietly collecting every piece of evidence I could. If there was one thing I knew, it was that confrontation without proof would just give her the chance to lie her way out. That day, I started paying attention to everything. The way she guarded her phone like it held state secrets. The way she always had an excuse to leave the house at odd times. Errands, she'd say with a smile, or a last-minute work thing. But what really set me off was her schedule. Emily's routine had always been predictable, almost rigid. Now, she was working late at least twice a week, but when I called her office to check, casually of course, her coworkers said she'd left hours ago. The breaking point came 3 days later. It was late afternoon, and Emily had told me she was meeting her friend Clara for lunch. Something didn't sit right about it. Clara was sweet but chatty, the kind of person who would have posted their lunch date all over social media. So I called Clara myself. "Oh no," Clara said, her voice bright and confused. "We haven't seen each other in weeks." Did she say I was there? I didn't even remember how I ended the call. My hands were shaking, my chest tight with anger I couldn't express. She was lying to my face, bold as brass, thinking I'd just buy it. I tracked her location. Yes, I know how that sounds, but desperate times call for desperate measures. Emily had shared her location with me months ago when she went on a solo trip, and she'd clearly forgotten to turn it off. Her phone pinged from a bar downtown, not a fancy one, but the kind of dimly lit place where no one asks questions. I got in my car and drove, fast and focused. Every mile felt like a countdown to something I wasn't ready for but couldn't avoid. When I arrived, I parked down the street and walked toward the entrance, keeping my head down. Inside, the bar was loud and dim, with the smell of stale beer and bad decisions hanging in the air. And there she was. Emily was sitting in a booth near the back, leaning across the table toward the same man I'd seen in the yard. He had his arm draped over the back of the booth, and her smile was wide, too wide, like she wasn't pretending with him. I stood there for a moment, the noise around me fading into nothing. My mind was spinning. A part of me wanted to walk right up to them, flip the table, and demand answers. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo. She didn't even notice me. I left the bar before my anger could get the better of me, driving home with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly it hurt. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about control. She thought she was untouchable, that her lies were airtight. But she had underestimated me. I didn't just want answers. I wanted her to see that I wasn't the fool she thought I was. And as I stared at the photo of them on my phone, a plan began to form. That photo burned a hole in my pocket. Every time I looked at it, a storm brewed inside me. Rage, humiliation, betrayal. But I knew I couldn't act on impulse. I had to think. If I confronted Emily without a plan, she'd twist it, gaslight me, make me doubt what I'd seen. No, this had to be precise, undeniable. The first thing I did was call an old friend, Marcus. Marcus and I had been close for years, and he worked as a private investigator. When I told him what was happening, his response was sharp and to the point. "She's playing you, man. You want to catch her? You'll need more than just one picture." Within hours, Marcus had a plan. Cameras, trackers, everything I'd need to uncover the truth. He loaned me a small GPS tracker, the kind that could be stuck discreetly under a car. He also helped me set up a hidden camera in the living room, aimed at the spot where Emily always left her purse. It wasn't just about catching her cheating. I wanted to see what else she was hiding. The next few days were torture. I acted normal, biting my tongue every time Emily lied to me. The worst part? She was so damn good at it. "Work's been insane," she said one evening, kicking off her heels as she sank into the couch. "I barely had time to eat lunch today." She wasn't at work. The GPS showed she'd spent 2 hours at a hotel downtown. Another night, she came home late with the excuse that she'd been helping Clara with a family emergency. Clara, of course, knew nothing about it when I casually mentioned it to her the next day. I felt like I was living with a stranger, someone who could look me in the eye and lie so smoothly it almost seemed like second nature. Then came the break I'd been waiting for. The tracker pinged her location one afternoon, a cafe on the edge of town. It wasn't the same bar as before, but it was the perfect place to meet someone discreetly. I texted Marcus, and within 20 minutes he was there, snapping photos from a distance. "Got her," Marcus said when he called me later. "And you're not going to like this." The photos were clear. Emily sitting across from the same guy, their hands intertwined on the table. She looked radiant, like she was glowing. I hated how happy Marcus had even managed to follow them as they left the cafe, capturing a damning shot of them walking into a nearby motel together. That night, I finally had the proof I needed. As Emily sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, I calmly asked, "How is Clara today?" She didn't even flinch. "Oh, fine. Same old stuff, you know?" It was astonishing. She lied without hesitation, without even looking up from her screen. I nodded, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment before I stood up and walked to the bedroom. There, I pulled out my laptop and transferred the photos Marcus had sent me. Each image was more damning than the last, the kind of evidence that even she couldn't spin her way out of. But I wasn't ready to confront her yet. Not fully. I wanted to see how far she'd take this, how many more lies she'd tell, how deep her betrayal went. And then, as I stared at those photos, the words Marcus had said earlier echoed in my head. "She's playing you." Not anymore. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for her to fall into it. The next evening, I decided it was time to start unraveling her web of lies. Not all at once. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of knowing I was coming for her. No, I wanted to make her squirm, to feel the walls closing in before I dealt the final blow. Emily was in the kitchen making dinner when I casually walked in, the photo of her and him at the cafe still fresh in my mind. "Hey, Em," I said, leaning against the counter. "I ran into Clara today." Her head snapped up for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to catch the flicker of panic in her eyes before she quickly masked it with a smile. "Oh," she said, feigning interest as she chopped vegetables. "What did she say?" "She mentioned you haven't seen each other in weeks," I said lightly, watching her closely. "Funny. I thought you two had lunch together the other day." Emily froze, the knife hovering over the cutting board. For a split second, her mask slipped, and I saw the gears turning in her head, searching for a way to spin this. "Oh, I meant I tried to see her," she said quickly, forcing a laugh. "But she had to cancel last minute. I guess I forgot to mention it." I smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the kind that said, "I know what you're doing." "Ah, that makes sense," I said, playing along. "It's hard to keep track of everything, isn't it?" Her shoulders relaxed, and she turned back to the cutting board, thinking she'd dodged the bullet. But I wasn't done. The next move came 2 days later. I was in the living room, reviewing the footage from the hidden camera I'd set up. At first, it was mundane. Emily tossing her purse on the counter, rifling through her phone. But then, on one particular day, she pulled out a folded note and smiled as she read it. I paused the footage, my jaw tight. The note was in her hands for barely a moment before she tucked it into a pocket and left the room. But the look on her face said it all. She wasn't smiling like that for me. That night, as we sat at the dinner table, I decided to test her again. So, I began, taking a sip of my drink. "What's the most interesting thing that happened to you today?" She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "Not much," she said casually. "Just the usual work stuff. What about you?" "Oh, same," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Though I did find something interesting earlier. A little note, tucked in your purse." Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. "What are you talking about?" she said, her tone carefully neutral. "You know," I said, my voice calm but sharp, "the one you were reading in the living room a few days ago." Her eyes darted to the side, just for a second, but it was enough. I stood up, pulling my phone from my pocket. "Imagined it? Funny, because I have it on video." Her face paled, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. What are you doing, Adam?" she asked, her voice trembling just enough to betray her. "What am I doing?" I said, my voice rising. "No, Emily, the question is what the hell you're doing. Late-night meetings? Mysterious notes? Lunches with someone who sure as hell isn't Clara?" She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She was cornered, and she knew it. "Who is he, Emily?" I demanded, slamming my hands on the table. "Tell me right now." Her expression hardened, and the fear in her eyes turned to defiance. "You're being ridiculous," she snapped. "You're paranoid. I can't believe you're spying on me like this." "Ridiculous," I said, laughing bitterly. "Paranoid? I saw you, Emily. With him. At the cafe. At the motel. I saw everything." The color drained from her face, and for a moment, she just stared at me, completely silent. Then, finally, she spoke. "You had no right," she said quietly, her voice shaking with anger. "You had no right to follow me." "No right," I said, my voice cold. "No right to know that my wife is sneaking around behind my back? That she's lying to me every chance she gets? No, Emily, you're the one who has no right. No right to stand there and act like I'm the problem." Her defiance wavered, but only for a moment. Then, she crossed her arms and said something that sent a chill down my spine. "You don't know the whole story, Adam, and maybe you don't want to." Her words hung in the air like a loaded gun. But if she thought she could scare me, she was dead wrong. Because whatever game she was playing, I was ready to see it through to the end. Emily's words echoed in my head long after the confrontation. "You don't know the whole story, and maybe you don't want to." She was wrong. I wanted to know everything. I needed to. After she stormed off that night, slamming the bedroom door behind her, I sat in the living room, staring at the dark screen of my phone. My hands shook, but not from fear. It was fury, white-hot and consuming. She wasn't apologetic, wasn't even sorry she got caught. No, she had doubled down, trying to make me feel like I was the villain. But this wasn't her story to control anymore. The next morning, Emily acted like nothing had happened. She walked into the kitchen, poured herself a cup of coffee, and glanced at me over the rim of the mug. Her eyes were sharp, calculating. "Are we going to talk about last night?" she asked, her voice dripping with false calm. "Sure," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Why don't you start by telling me the whole story? You know, the one I supposedly don't want to hear." Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might actually come clean. But instead, she laughed. A bitter, hollow sound that grated on my nerves. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" she said, shaking her head. "Fine. You want to know? He's a friend, Adam. That's it. A friend I can actually talk to without being judged or interrogated." I leaned forward, my voice low and cold. "Friends don't meet at motels, Emily. Try again." Her expression flickered, just for a moment, but she recovered quickly. "You're insane," she snapped, her tone laced with venom. "You're twisting everything into some kind of conspiracy. Do you even hear yourself? You've been spying on me, tracking me like I'm some kind of criminal." I stood up, slamming my hand on the table so hard the coffee mug rattled. "Don't you dare try to turn this around on me," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You're the one sneaking around, lying to my face, and now you want to play the victim?" For the first time, she didn't have a snappy comeback. She just stared at me, her mask slipping enough for me to see the cracks beneath. "You don't understand," she finally said, her voice quieter now. "He listens to me. He doesn't make me feel trapped." Her words hit me like a slap to the face. Trapped? After everything I'd done for her, all the sacrifices I'd made. This was her excuse? "You feel trapped," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Trapped in the house we built together? In the life I worked my ass off to give you? Spare me, Emily." Her eyes blazed with anger now, her defiance back in full force. "You think everything is about you, don't you? Your job, your plans, your version of happiness. Maybe if you paid half as much attention to me as you do to your damn work, I wouldn't have needed someone else." The words hung in the air like a bomb, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I stepped back, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "Needed someone else?" I repeated, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. "You don't even deny it. Do you realize what you've done? To me? To us?" She crossed her arms, her chin lifting defiantly. "You pushed me away, Adam. Don't pretend you're blameless in all this." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "This isn't about blame. This is about respect, about trust. And you threw all of that away the moment you decided to run around with him." Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. She didn't care, not really. She wasn't sorry. "I'll make this simple," I said, my voice cold and sharp. "You tell me the truth, every single detail, or I'll send those photos to everyone we know. Your family, your friends, even your boss. Let's see how he feels about having a homewrecker on his team." Her eyes widened in shock, and for the first time, I saw real fear on her face. "You wouldn't," she said, her voice trembling. "Try me," I said, my gaze unwavering. Emily stared at me, her mind clearly racing. She was calculating, weighing her options, trying to figure out if I was bluffing. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Fine. You want the truth? He's not just some random guy. His name is David. We've been seeing each other for a few months." The words hit me like a sledgehammer, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I nodded, my expression calm. "And," I said, folding my arms. "And he's married," she admitted, her voice laced with bitterness. "That's why we've been so careful. He doesn't want his wife to know, and I didn't want you to find out." Her words set my blood boiling. Not only was she betraying me, but she was doing it with someone who was betraying his own family. It wasn't just selfish, it was disgusting. "You're unbelievable," I said, my voice filled with contempt. "He thought he could take my wife and scare me with threats. But he forgot. This is my world, not his." Emily's face twisted in confusion, but I didn't elaborate. Instead, I walked away, leaving her standing there, her lies unraveling around her. She thought this was the end of it. She had no idea it was only the beginning. That night, as Emily slept in the guest room, I sat alone in the living room, staring at my laptop screen. Her confession had given me clarity, but it hadn't brought me peace. David. A name, finally. It wasn't just some faceless figure haunting my marriage anymore. It was a man with a name, a life, a wife of his own. I thought about the way Emily had spoken about him, the bitterness in her voice when she admitted they'd been careful. She wasn't remorseful. She was resentful. Resentful that her secret had been exposed, that I had the upper hand now. But this wasn't just about her anymore. David had made a choice too, and it was time he learned the consequences. I found him easily. A quick search on LinkedIn and Facebook revealed everything I needed to know. His last name, his job, his wife. Her name was Sarah, and judging by her profile, she was a stay-at-home mom with 2 young kids. They looked like the perfect family: Christmas photos, vacation snapshots, birthday parties. It made me sick. I didn't rush into contacting her, though. Not yet. I wanted to make sure I had everything I needed to destroy him before I made my move. I reached out to Marcus again, and within a day, he had tracked down David's routine. Gym every morning at 6, works in an office downtown, and usually hits the same bar twice a week, Marcus said over the phone. And get this, he's been seen with your wife at that bar more than once. Looks like they're not as discreet as they think. Perfect. The next morning, I drove to the gym Marcus had mentioned. I parked a block away and waited, my fingers tapping against the steering wheel. Sure enough, at 6:15 a.m., David walked out of the building, looking smug and self-assured. He was tall, well-dressed, the kind of guy who probably thought he could get away with anything. I followed him, not closely enough to tip him off, but enough to see where he went. When he stopped at a coffee shop, I parked across the street and waited. Then, as he came out with a cup in hand, I stepped out of my car and crossed the street. "David," I said, my voice steady and low. He turned, his brow furrowing as he looked at me. "Do I know you?" "You should," I said, taking another step closer. "You've been sleeping with my wife." The color drained from his face, but he quickly masked it with a smug grin. "Look, man, I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't," I snapped, cutting him off. "Don't insult me by pretending you don't know. I've seen the photos, David. I know everything." He stared at me, his jaw tightening. For a moment, it seemed like he might try to bluff his way out of it. But then he shrugged, his grin returning. "So what?" he said, his tone flippant. "What are you going to do about it?" My fists clenched at my sides, but I kept my composure. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice cold. "You're going to end it. Now, you're going to block her number, delete her from your life, and tell her it's over. Because if you don't, I'll make sure Sarah knows exactly what kind of man she married. And believe me, I've got the proof to back it up." David's smug grin faltered, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. "You wouldn't," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Try me," I said, stepping closer. "Do you really want to find out what happens when I tell your wife about the motel visits? The late-night bar dates? You think she'll stick around after that?" He didn't respond, his jaw clenching as he stared at me. "Your choice," I said, turning to walk away. "But don't think for a second that I won't follow through." As I walked back to my car, I felt a surge of satisfaction. He thought he could take what wasn't his, but now the ball was in my court. When I got home, Emily was waiting for me in the kitchen, her arms crossed and her expression icy. "Where were you?" she demanded. I smirked, walking past her without answering. "Don't worry about it." She followed me into the living room, her voice rising. "Don't play games with me, Adam. I want to know where you went." I turned to face her, my smirk fading. "I went to see David." Her face fell, and for a moment she looked genuinely afraid. You what?" "I told him it's over," I said, my voice cold. "I told him to block your number, cut you out of his life. So, if you're planning on sneaking off to see him again, don't bother." Her eyes blazed with anger, and she took a step closer, her voice shaking. "You had no right." "I had every right," I shot back. "You made this my business the moment you decided to betray me." Emily stood there, her fists clenched at her sides, her face a mixture of rage and fear. For the first time, she realized that I wasn't the man she thought she could manipulate. And as I walked past her, heading for the door, I said one final thing that left her speechless. "This isn't over, Emily. Not even close." Emily didn't speak to me for the rest of the day. Her anger radiated through the house like heat from a furnace. Every slammed door, every loud footstep. It was all her way of trying to regain control. But her silence didn't bother me. If anything, it gave me space to finalize the next step in my plan. The evening came, and Emily left the house without a word. No excuse, no pretense, just the sound of the front door closing behind her. I didn't need a tracker to know where she was going. She was going to find David. I let her go. Instead of following her, I made a call. Sarah answered on the second ring, her voice soft and warm, completely unaware of the storm about to hit her. "Hi, Sarah," I said, my voice steady but serious. "We've never met, but my name is Adam. I'm Emily's husband." There was a long pause, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. "Okay," she said cautiously. "Why are you calling me?" "I think you know," I said. "It's about David." Another pause, this one heavier. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet, almost trembling. "What about him?" For a moment I considered sparing her, giving her only the broad strokes. But no, she deserved the truth, every ugly detail. "I have proof that he's been seeing my wife," I said. "Photos, texts, everything. I'm sending it to you now." I hit send before she could respond. A few moments passed in silence, and then I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Oh my God," she whispered. I had no idea." "I'm sorry," I said, and for the first time, I meant it. "I know this is a lot to process, but I thought you deserved to know." Her voice hardened. "Thank you for telling me. I'll handle this." She hung up before I could say anything else. I sat back, the weight of what I'd done settling over me. There was no going back now. Emily came home late, her face flushed and her movements tense. She slammed her purse down on the counter and turned to face me, her eyes blazing. "What did you do?" she demanded, her voice sharp and accusing. I leaned against the wall, my arms crossed. "I told Sarah," I said simply. Her face twisted in rage, and she took a step closer. "You had no right to involve her. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I've done what you refused to do," I said coldly. "I told the truth." "You've ruined everything," she shouted, her voice breaking. "You've destroyed lives." "No, Emily," I said, my voice rising to match hers. "You destroyed lives. You destroyed our marriage the moment you decided to crawl into bed with him. Don't you dare blame me for cleaning up the mess you made." She stared at me, her chest heaving, and for a moment, I thought she might actually hit me. But then her anger collapsed into something else. Desperation. "Adam," she said, her voice trembling now. "Please, we can fix this. We can move past it. Just don't throw everything away." I laughed bitterly. "Fix this? Move past it? Are you serious? You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around with another man, and now that you've been caught, you want to pretend everything's fine? It doesn't work that way, Emily." Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt nothing. No pity, no sympathy, just a cold, hollow detachment. "I loved you," I said quietly. "I gave you everything, and you threw it away like it meant nothing. There's no coming back from that." She reached out as if to touch me, but I stepped back, shaking my head. "Don't. You made your choice, Emily. Now you have to live with it." As I walked past her, heading for the door, she called after me, her voice desperate. "Where are you going?" "Out," I said without turning around. "I need to breathe, and I need to figure out how to end this." I left her standing there, her world crumbling around her, just as she had shattered mine. This wasn't just the collapse of our marriage. It was the collapse of the person I thought she was. And as I drove away, the only thought running through my mind was this: let it burn. By the time I got back home, the house was dark and silent. Emily was still awake. I could see the faint glow of the bedroom lamp through the window, but I didn't care. I wasn't coming back to talk. I was coming back to finish what she started. I went to my study, closed the door, and pulled out the envelope I'd prepared earlier that day. Inside were printed copies of everything. The photos from Marcus, screenshots of text messages I'd pulled from her cloud backup, and the damning footage from the hidden camera. It was all there, laid out like the autopsy of a marriage. I placed the envelope on the coffee table in the living room and sat down, waiting. It didn't take long. 10 minutes later, Emily came downstairs, her face pale and her movements hesitant. She stopped when she saw me sitting there, her eyes darting to the envelope like it was a ticking bomb. "What's that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your truth," I said coldly. "Everything you've done, everything you've lied about, all in one place. It's over, Emily." She hesitated, then moved closer, her hands trembling as she picked up the envelope. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what was inside. "Adam," she started, her voice breaking. "Please, don't do this. We can still—" "Stop," I said sharply, cutting her off. "Don't insult me by pretending there's anything left to save. This isn't a negotiation, Emily. This is the end." Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't feel a shred of sympathy. "Not anymore." "You want it out?" I continued, my voice steady. "Well, congratulations. You've got it. I've already contacted a lawyer. You'll be hearing from them soon." Her knees buckled, and she sank onto the couch, clutching the envelope like it was the only thing tethering her to reality. "Adam, please," she begged. "Don't do this. I'll end it with him. I'll do whatever it takes." I leaned forward, my voice cold and unrelenting. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about him anymore. This is about you. You lied to me. You betrayed me. You didn't just destroy our marriage, Emily. You destroyed us." She sobbed, but I didn't let her guilt sway me. "What about David?" she choked out. "What did you do to him?" "Don't worry about David," I said, standing up. "He's got his own problems to deal with. I told his wife everything. And trust me, she's not as forgiving as I am." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "You told Sarah?" "Of course I did," I said, my voice sharp. "She deserved to know the truth, just like I did. You think you can walk through life ruining people and never face the consequences? Not this time." She sat there, silent and broken, as I walked toward the stairs. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice small and shaky. "To pack," I said without looking back. "I'm staying at Marcus's for now. The papers will be ready in a few days. After that, we're done." Her sobs echoed through the house as I climbed the stairs, but they didn't faze me. This wasn't my guilt to bear. As I packed my bag, I thought about the life we had built together, the memories we had shared. It hurt to let it go, but it hurt even more to stay. Emily wasn't the person I thought she was, and I wasn't going to spend another second pretending we could fix something so irreparably broken. Before I left, I paused at the door, looking back at her one last time. She was still on the couch, her head in her hands, the envelope sitting beside her like a silent witness to her destruction. "Goodbye, Emily," I said quietly. She didn't respond. As I walked out the door and into the crisp night air, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Freedom. This wasn't the ending I wanted, but it was the one I needed. And as I drove away, leaving the ruins of our marriage behind me, I knew one thing for certain. She thought she could betray me and walk away unscathed, but she forgot. This was my world, not hers.